Jenny, congratulations on being elected as an MP for New South Wales for the electorate of Newtown at the last state election. In your inaugural speech, you spoke about your relationship with your partner and you said you wouldn't get married even after 19 years together until the law on marriage equality changed. Why is it such an important issue to you?
Look, I think the idea of equality is something, as someone from a human rights background, I see sort of equality and people's protection around human rights as something that is a basic principle that we need to approach the way we live our lives, approach the way we make our laws, approach the way we treat each other. And so to me, the idea of somehow allowing discrimination within our laws that says that some people are more equal than others, some people get access to things that other people don't, simply on the basis of the sex of their partner, is just unacceptable for me. And it was, one of the campaigns that I was really strongly involved with. My partner had also been involved campaigning with the Greens around marriage equality because he worked for an MP that was there when the marriage amendments went through. So we both had a strong connection to that campaign and felt that there was no way that we would be able to feel comfortable about entering into that official relationship while there were still many of the people that we, are friends with, that we work with, that we interact with, were being discriminated against.
The Greens have been at the forefront of campaigning for marriage equality. Why is this?
Well, I think that the starting point, and I think that we often forget this, is that the campaign was initially to stop the discrimination being put in place, because what occurred is that we didn't have a definition of a man and a woman in the Marriage Act in Australia, and it was unfortunately and very disappointingly the Howard government that brought those amendments in and didn't get any opposition at the time from the Labor Party. And so we find ourselves in a situation where the strong campaign for marriage equality sort of forgets that we had this retrograde backstep in Australia that actually sort of moved it to a point of saying, no, we're going to actively discriminate within our laws now, something that wasn't actively being discriminated before. And I think that, to me, is something that the Greens were very strong and vocal at the time when that amendment went through. We were, as is often the case, very disappointed by the weak opposition from Labor and the failure to actually live up to, I think, what many Labor voters and supporters expect to be their principles. And so from there, we worked with a number of different groups and community groups, and at the start it was pretty heated. People were pretty cynical about how much of a priority we were doing it, but I think we were certainly right to be making it a priority.
They changed the Marriage Act in 2004 regarding men and women. Do you think this hampered the speed of change?
Look, I think it turned it into something that it didn't need to be. I think that what it all of a sudden did is set up this sort of, if you like, this battleground around something that actually the politicians, I think, seemed to think there was a need to have a battleground on. But majority of the community, as we've seen, even the conservative polls suggest that in the order of 70% of people in Australia are supportive of marriage equality. So I think what it did was set up a division that wasn't really there. It created divisions within the community because of some political, vested political, conservative, religious interests, whatever you want to call them, that then in a sense tried to create divisions in our community that weren't there. And what we instead saw was the community saying, this isn't what we want, and that's what the campaign is that we've been seeing, building and building and building support to almost get the politicians to catch up.
Marriage is very much seen as a federal issue. Why do state MPs get involved?
Look, I think equality is an issue that affects all of our lives. I don't think anyone lives their lives based on what is the jurisdiction of local government, state government or federal government. We know that when it comes to things like equality, when it comes to standing up against discrimination, it's crucial that we do that at all levels of government and in all areas of policy and the way that we live our lives. And so to me, marriage equality is something that clearly needs to be handled at a federal level, but that's not to say that state governments can't and shouldn't. They should be able to say, look, we as a state believe this is something that is important to the people that live in this state, and therefore we want our federal government to act. We tried to do that in the past in New South Wales before I was in that parliament, but I think now the action's going to be at the federal level.
Why do you think Australian politicians have been so slow to come on board?
Look, I don't think it is all Australian politicians, but I cannot understand the arrogance, to be honest. I cannot understand the arrogance that people have. Most recently, Luke Foley, who was the leader of the opposition, who had in, perhaps my favourite ever Star headline, the Immaculate Conversion. But I couldn't understand how someone, any individual, whether they're a politician or not, thinks that somehow they have the ability to determine if one person is more equal than another person. That they have the ability to say, I'll give you some rights, but you can't have those, and I get to be the arbiter and the determine that. I cannot understand the arrogance, and I cannot understand the self-confidence of someone actually being in a position where they say, well, I think it's better for me to decide that you're not as equal as me. It's mind-blowing to me. And the best I can say is, thank goodness we have community campaigns that sort of show this up when people try and do it.
What do you say to people who are perhaps religious, who don't oppose marriage equality on that basis, or who are traditionalist? What do you say to them to reassure them?
Look, I think it's about saying that the relationship that two people have, the relationship that one individual has with another person that is to be celebrated or recognised in a formal relationship like marriage, is something that is sacred and special to those two people. Another two people's special sacred relationship is not going to have an impact on those people's relationship, and I think that that's really important for us to remember. I also think it's really important for those people to, especially if they come from sort of stronger religious backgrounds or traditional conservative sort of views, to think about it as to whether it was their son or their daughter. And I think that often you see very quick shifts and changes when people start thinking about it and saying, well, actually, at the end of the day, would I like to be able to stand there and watch my son or daughter, get married, walk down the aisle? Would I be happy because they were happy and they'd found the person they wanted to spend the rest of their life with? When you get down to those personal questions, it's very hard to imagine many people saying, I would completely disregard that, and I don't want that same level of, affection and love that can be celebrated in marriage to be felt by my children.
One argument I sometimes hear is that marriage is a patriarchal institution. Are we buying into that?
Oh, look, I think we should fight to the end when it comes to marriage equality, but we should never ever pretend that everyone should have to get married to have their relationship recognised. And I think that it's very important to realise that actually what we've got is a real connection between the idea of marriage is important, marriage equality is important because currently the law discriminates against certain people and doesn't allow them to access marriage. That is not to say that marriage is the be-all and end-all, and that is not to say that marriage should be something that is required to be able to recognise a relationship. What we need to be able to say is that while marriage is there, while some people want to be able to access marriage that can't, we need to fight until we have that full equality.
Why do you think so many politicians are coming on board now?
Because that's what happens. The community shifts and moves and the politicians catch up. That is always the case, whether you look at whatever the issue is. The parliaments catch up to the people. The movement, the social change that occurs always happens in our communities and on our streets. And occasionally you hope that you get some leadership within the parliament, within the politicians, to be able to help bring that change about. But we know at the end of the day, the change doesn't happen in the parliaments, it happens on the streets.
As a state politician, what do you think you can do now that you couldn't when you were more of a lobbyist for Amnesty International?
Look, I think one thing is about the opportunity to be able to raise progressive, diverse points of view within the New South Wales Parliament, on the floor of the Parliament. And I do think that being able to bring a perspective, my personal perspective, my experience of living in Newtown, my background and my circumstance, to be able to raise those issues in Parliament and speak on behalf of the, vibrant, progressive, diverse community that is the electorate of Newtown, is a really positive thing, and it's a huge advantage to being able to shape not just the way that our communities are represented, but also how we reshape New South Wales politics. I think the other side of it that's really important is that it allows us the opportunity to do direct work to help the most vulnerable people in our community. And while we might talk about marriage equality, we might talk about bigger issues around equality and discrimination, there is actually, day to day, really personal discriminatory behaviour happening to individual people. There is really sort of fear and concern in the community. People are very vulnerable, challenges around affordable housing, access to services that they need to support them. Those are real issues, and as a local member of parliament, you are actually able to help in a small way with individual cases like that on a daily basis, and that's hugely rewarding.
What do you say to people who think there are bigger LGBTQI issues to campaign on?
Of course there are. There's on any issue we choose, someone that used to work at Amnesty, it used to always be the debate, how do you decide whether or not campaigning to end the death penalty is more important than campaigning to protect freedom of expression, or campaigning to end discrimination, or campaigning to support people's access to housing. You can't determine these rights and which is the more important than the other. What we have to recognise is that the fight for equality is a big fight. The struggle for equality is a big struggle, and marriage equality is one of those ones that at the moment is getting a lot of attention, but that will just be another little bit of equality that we'll achieve before we can then see putting together an end to discrimination across the board.
What is the best way to legislate for marriage equality? Is it a referendum like Ireland, or should it be up to just politicians?
We don't need a referendum. The reality is that we know, we can look at the polls, we can say, look, majority of people support this. We don't need a referendum. What we need is for the politicians to stop saying in Canberra that they somehow get a conscience vote on who gets a right to equality and who doesn't. Equality is not a matter of conscience. It is actually a matter of human rights, of basic principles of justice and fairness and decency. People should support marriage equality, and we should move on to be able to fight our next equality battle.
What can we do here in Australia as members of the public and voters to campaign?
Oh, look, I think we can stay good-humoured about it. We can encourage people to ring their members of parliament. I think that there was a very good call to action at the recent marriage equality rally that said you shouldn't, if you're living in an area where your MP is supportive, then you should speak to your friends or family members and relatives that might live in different areas and their MP might have a different view. I think that there are good ways to be able to raise the community concerns, and I think positive stories, being able to tell the positive stories and hear from the mother or the father that actually doesn't want their child to feel discrimination. The joy of an aunt having attended a wedding in another country because they weren't able to do it here, but to see the celebration of that love. Those positive stories can try and at least help to bring people on board that might have more conservative, traditional values.
A couple more questions. Do you think we have a realistic chance of achieving marriage equality within the next couple of years?
Oh, look, people are saying by the end of the year. I think there's a momentum on now. It feels good. I think the real challenge is for no one political party to try and claim this as their own. It needs to be a cross-party political support. But we also need to be comfortable to be critical, and I'll be the first to say it. The idea of people getting a conscience vote on whether or not people are equal disturbs me outright, and that's why I'm so supportive of the Greens. It's why I'm a member of the Greens, is because we say that equality, will vote for it. Every MP, every vote, every time.
Jenny, thank you very much.
Thank you.